Welcome to the Low Carb USA podcast, where we seek to inspire you to help us build this community. I'm Doug Reynolds.
And this is Pam Devine.
So, Bret, Scher, hey, welcome to the show, man.
Thanks, Doug. It's great to connect again.
Wow. So the last time we spoke, you were working with pretty much predominantly with a diet doctor, and things have changed a bit now in the recent past. And I'd be really interested. I was saying off air that I don't even know that much about all the things that you've got involved with now. So maybe you can give us a little bit of a dump now on what you've been up to and what you're doing now.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. It's been such an amazing journey for, starting as a cardiologist and wanting to work as more of a preventative cardiologist, and then being sort of disillusioned with the way medicine is practiced, especially cardiology, and then getting into, metabolic health, and really wanted to focus on how to help people improve their metabolic health and therefore improve their cardiometabolic health, which eventually led me to, Diet Doctor, to be the medical director there, so we could really focus on evidence-based information and education about using ketogenic therapies for improving metabolic health. So for type 2 diabetes and so many other medical conditions that can improve with improving metabolic health. Well, one of them that we focused a little bit on was mental health and how ketogenic therapies can improve that. Mm-hmm. And so we did a little bit of that at Diet Doctor, and it was fascinating. All of it was fascinating, right? That to be on the forefront of helping people learn something, what seems like completely new, but really isn't completely new, about how to help people improve their health. Then, fortunately, through my work with Diet Doctor, I was connected with Jan Bazuki, and she was in the process of creating Metabolic Mind, specifically to talk about ketogenic and metabolic therapies for treating mental illness. And the more I sort of learned about her and her family's journey, which I can talk a little bit about, and what she was creating, it really was like saying, we are going to transform how medicine is practiced. We are going to fund the research and put forward an educational initiative to teach individuals and clinicians that this is a ketogenic therapy, right? Not a keto diet, not the, what people think are a fad weight loss diet, which is all wrong in itself anyway, but ketosis as a medical intervention to change the way your brain works, to help put symptoms of mental illness into remission, which is something that doesn't happen. I remember back to my psychiatry residency or my psychiatry rotation days, and now talking to all these practicing psychiatrists. And just like for type 2 diabetes, we used to never say type 2 diabetes remission. It was only control. Well, now remission of type 2 diabetes is a common statement because we've seen what can happen. So I see the same thing happening in psychiatry, and to hear the stories of, the quality of life lost and the lives lost due to psychiatric illnesses, and to think that we can make a significant impact on that and really completely change how medicine is practiced to give people more of a hope that they can get their lives back. I definitely wanted to be a part of it. So it's been about 7 or 8 months now, and it's been an amazing journey. And to see the impact we've already had and to see the potential for the impact we can have is pretty remarkable. So that's where I am now as the director of Metabolic Mind. And we've got our website at metabolicmind.org. We've got our YouTube channel where I'm putting forth a lot of videos and really trying to not only put forward our own message, but the message of others in this field of metabolic psychiatry, and sort of elevate what they're doing and fund the research that's happening. So it's that's maybe the not so quick summary, but I'd be happy to dig into more.
Yeah. So maybe you mentioned Jan Bazuki, and maybe let's tell people what her story, because I think that's it's pretty enlightening.
It is, yeah. So it's not just her story; it's the whole family story.
Right.
So Dave Bazuki is the founder and CEO of Roblox. So he and Jan together, their son Matt, one of 4 children, he has bipolar 1 disorder. Sort of surfaced in college and really just had a rocky course, and was having episodes of mania and psychosis, and they were having a really hard time getting him treated in a way that not only controlled his symptoms, but gave him his life back. And there was a point where he was in and out of inpatient treatment facilities and actually checked himself out and hitchhiked down from Oregon down to California and homeless, giving away all his possessions, living behind a dumpster. I mean, these are the stories that often end tragically. And here was this family that would do anything for their children and couldn't get him well. And it's a harrowing experience and story, but they were fortunate enough, she was spending hundreds of hours researching, what can I do? Treatments aren't working. What else is out there? And they tried so many different treatments. And she was fortunate enough to connect with Dr. Chris Palmer and others and was able to get Matt started on a ketogenic diet. And that's what really turned things around. And all of a sudden he was well, not just sort of like treated, but well. And fast forward now 2 years later, and as she describes it, he is more normal than any of his friends, is what she likes to say. But basically saying that he's got no stigma of mental illness, and he's been slowly weaning off his medications, and he's living a full life, which she was convinced he would never lead again when she was in the middle of all this. So because of that journey, and they're very philanthropic at baseline. Before all this happened, they were very philanthropic. So now they've, as part of their nonprofit, they are devoting a lot of their time and energy to this concept of metabolic therapies and ketogenic therapies for mental illness. So, and Matt's been a great spokesperson. On our YouTube channel, we have some interviews with him. He's been very vocal about his journey, and it's just really remarkable. And the amazing thing is, like, it's evidence-based. There's so much evidence about using ketogenic therapies for epilepsy. And now there's evidence for using it for dementia and for Alzheimer's disease. And there are just 3 studies presented at the International Society for Bipolar Disorder conference about using ketogenic therapies for bipolar disorder. So this is not some crazy wacko idea that has no basis. I mean, this has mechanistic science behind it, and now is starting to get outcome science behind it. And I mean, it transformed their life. And what Jan says is she wants to create the resources that she wanted when she was going through this, so that nobody would have to go through what she went through, and they'd be able to find this much faster and implement it easier to help change people's lives.
Yeah, you talked about Chris Palmer. Back in Boca a couple of years ago, he did a talk there, and I forget whether it was one of the ones that you were at. But he did a talk, and he kind of ended with a story about one of his patients and how how bad he was, and how he had transformed his life and was kind of living as a normal person now. And it was just the way he did it. He put it and described it as well. It was like, and it was like he finished his talk, and everybody was just like looking around. It was like you could hear a pin drop. It was like dead quiet. Everyone had a lump in their throat. I had to get up there and kind of kick off the Q&A, and I couldn't speak properly. You know what I mean? I literally was in tears. And
such a great example of how dramatic this is. I mean, it really is.
Because the story was describing what his life was like, how terrible it was for him. Can you imagine living like this? And then to be able to transform that completely is incredible. There's a lot of stories, like you mentioned, Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, and a lot of neurological disorders that we kind of have become aware of for a while now already, that these ketogenic therapies can really help with. But there is a little bit on the mental health side, but not as much yet, I don't think. And back a few years ago, Rob Sivers came to one of our events down in Florida, and he was the first person that, just talking, sort of outside of the actual conference, that made me appreciate how important it was to consider food addiction, carbohydrate, sugar addiction, in trying to help and come up with strategies to help people stay on this diet and And so it eventually transformed into Boca this year, where we had an entire day focused on food addiction and sugar addiction, and it was fantastic. But it also gave us an idea that having like focusing on one particular condition for at least part of the event, instead of just having one talk about it, was maybe a good idea. So we're coming up next month or this month still already in San Diego. We're going to focus on cancer. Next year in Boca is going to be type 1, but next year in San Diego is open. And mental health is one of the ones that I've kind of thrown out there already. And having this discussion makes me feel like that thought is getting solidified, where we can I can work with you guys and let's put a day together in August next year.
Absolutely.
To focus on mental health and how these therapies can help.
Yeah, and if you're talking a year from now, there's going to be so much more evidence by then, because we're already funding 5 different research trials that are underway, and there are more happening. I mean, the amount of momentum that this field is gaining is just really remarkable. And like I said, there were those 3 studies presented at the International Society of Bipolar Disorder, and the reaction was incredible. I mean, so many psychiatrists were just blown away. Like, I never heard of this. This sounds amazing. I can't wait to learn more. And to be fair, there were still that subset that says, oh, well, why would you do that? They're all going to die of heart disease, right? Like, just have no concept of what a keto diet is, or what ketosis is, or therapeutic ketosis, and just going off of, sort of the unfortunate misconceptions from mainstream media. But the opportunity to educate those doctors, because look, I think everybody can realize we can do better as physicians, especially in psychiatry. We can do much better. We have to do much better. And this opens that opportunity. So a big part of our message is breaking down the misconceptions of ketosis, which we have to do for type 2 diabetes and PCOS and type 1 diabetes and just metabolic dysfunction and so forth. Just across the board, we need to break down those misconceptions. But then too, talk about how it affects brain health. And I like to be purposely vague about that and say brain health, because that's how it helps with seizures. That's how it helps with Alzheimer's. That's how it helps with mental illness. Our brain needs energy just like the rest of our body needs energy. And just like our body can be insulin resistant and not be able to use glucose well for energy, the same can happen in our brains. So you provide ketones as an alternative fuel source. I use the word alternative, but really should be sort of like the baseline fuel source. And all of a sudden it can work better. It can work better. And we have evidence to show decreased neuroinflammation. We have evidence to show neurotransmitter balances with increased GABA and decreased glutamate. We have evidence to show improved mitochondrial function, which is something Dr. Chris Palmer has talked a lot about. I mean, this doesn't happen with a quote unquote diet, right? This doesn't happen with just a Mediterranean diet or with a vegetarian diet. This happens with ketosis as a therapeutic intervention, which could be Mediterranean, which could be vegetarian, which could be carnivore, which could be omnivore, right? It could be any of that. But it's the process of ketosis that improves the metabolic health and changes the brain fuel that then improves brain function. And as a result, you can see improvements in all these different areas. So you can have more than a day on that for sure. But this is what we're trying to do, to create this awareness and this enthusiasm. So like you said, conferences like yours can focus on it and educate so many more people, because that's what we need. Not only do we need the general public to be educated, we need clinicians to be educated. Because this isn't taught in medical school. This isn't taught in residency or fellowships or right? We need to start breaking down those barriers so people can understand that they can implement this with their patients.
It's heartening to hear you say that a lot of the psychiatrists are blown away by this and want to learn more, because that's how I feel. I mean, you're aware of and especially in your field of cardiology, you know what the pushback's like with regards to this. And why does it need to be like that? Some different, and it's like different genres of doctors. Like the oncologists are like some of the worst. Have their heads in the sand, and so when I find an oncologist that gets it, it's like brilliant. But you said something about how so many of these psychiatrists are looking at this and saying, whoa, I want to learn more.
Yeah.
And that's encouraging, man. You know, the fact that, because that's like our biggest hurdle is the subset of doctors and practitioners that get it is very small. And we're constantly trying to convince everybody else. And now you've got this group that seem, from what you're saying, seem to be more open-minded than others to take a look at this and see if it's something that at the very least they should offer to their patients as an option.
Yeah, and I don't want to misrepresent it and say everybody was that way, because certainly there were people who were concerned. But what was so interesting about the data that was being presented, Dr. Shivani Sethi, she presented her data and showed, calculated cardiovascular risk. So in her study, LDL went up a small amount, but calculated cardiovascular risk did not go up. And that's something that's so important to show, which Verta Health showed in their publication back in 2018. Right. LDL went up 10%, calculated cardiovascular risk went down 12%. Okay, that's got to be pretty eye-opening. Right. And Dr. Ian Campbell presented his data where LDL didn't change. And so, this concern of keto diet equals fat equals high LDL and heart attack just needs to disappear, because that is just purely false. And his presentations like this to physicians in a major international clinical conference that need to continue, because the eye-opening of this was like, you could see people thinking like, wow, that's not what I had in mind, or that's not my preconception. And unfortunately, our preconceptions as physicians sometimes can be pretty strong and hard to knock down. But that's where we need just more dissemination of this data, more dissemination of these important concepts, because like you said, cardiology is going to be the last to fall, because it's all about LDL, it's all about low fat, and that's just steering us in the wrong direction.
It's just so entrenched that like people like you have the hardest job, because you're kind of one of those guys that's on the front lines of trying to break those preconceptions of the cardiology community down, because that's the, like you said, it goes from trying to convince Pam's dad to consider changing what he was eating because of the cancer issues that he was having, that it would help at the very least with making his treatment better, let alone the fact that it could also help with the disease itself. But like the very first words out of his mouth was, "Well, then I'll just die of a heart attack."
Right.
And so it's from him all the way up to most other physicians that it's like the very first thing that comes out of their mouths when you start talking about it, even if they believe that it will help reverse type 2 diabetes, or it will help change these mental illnesses, or help with these mental illnesses, or these neurological issues, or whatever it is. Even if they believe that will help, my patient's still going to die of a heart attack. So what's the point? That's to me the biggest stumbling block. How do you fix that? You're the guy that's got to do it. Like, how do you change those preconceptions?
First and foremost, I think that the number one preconception we have to go after, we could say, all right, we're all going to just assume increased LDL causes heart attacks. Let's just assume that, okay? Right. Which I don't want to, but if we say we're going to assume that, the first thing to break down is, though, ketosis does not mean increased LDL. In fact, the studies show for the overwhelming majority of people, LDL does not go up. So that is the number one preconception we have to knock down. So without challenging anybody's religion, basically, about LDL, you can still educate them and say, look, ketosis does not mean LDL is going to go up. So if you can see a benefit, which we are proving and has been proven, then why wouldn't you try it and just measure LDL and see if LDL goes up? And if it doesn't, now you have a therapy that has a very good chance of working with no negative side effects, basically. Then if LDL does go up, okay, now we're going to talk about the
whether that's an issue or not.
Right, the deeper issues of LDL versus metabolic health and et cetera. But
Right.
just on its surface, this misconception that ketosis means high LDL needs to go away. And that's
Right.
what we need. That's where I think we need to first focus our education.
Okay, yeah. So that we need to focus on that a lot, though. We need, like, every time we talk about it, you need to mention, because that other cohort that you're talking about is Dave's lean mass hyper responders, right? The lean runner type, athlete type person, where,
Yeah.
and I'm one of those, where LDL does go up significantly. And like you said, now he's doing this amazing clinical trial now and all of this stuff. He's making a movie about it. And hopefully that will give us some tools to debunk the concept of high LDL causes it. But I think what you're saying, I've never even thought about that before, but that is a very small cohort. And the rest of us, or the rest of the people, not us, because I'm in that part of it, but that's true. They if anything, the LDL goes down. And so you know, hyper responders aside, for the majority of people, it's not going to happen. So try it, and if your LDL really does respond, then okay, yeah, let's take another look at it. But for the majority of you, it's not going to go up. So, and then you'll get all the other benefits that you kind of agree will happen if you do this.
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, I mean, that's a big part of our message at Metabolic Mind, just not just about how this can be an effective therapy, but how it could be a safe therapy and how to see that and how to talk to your doctor about that. And I think that's first and foremost. Like, look, we can measure my LDL. We can see if it goes up. And by the way, we can measure my triglycerides and HDL and blood sugar and insulin and all these other things that are going to improve. And we can measure the LDL and see if it goes up. And if it doesn't, then we've got a therapy with only beneficial effects.
Right.
So
and
absolutely, I highly encourage everybody to discuss that with their doctor. And the other thing is, you know, just to show the level of knowledge about ketogenic therapies among physicians is many of them will hear ketosis and think ketoacidosis and think they're one and the same.
Right.
And on the one hand, like you sort of can't fault them because that's all we're taught in medical school and residency. That's all we're taught about ketosis is the life-threatening medical condition of ketoacidosis. We're not taught that over the course of, you know, thousands or hundreds of thousands of years of evolution, we've been in and out of ketosis just normally as a natural process. Like, we're not taught that. But that's the case. You know, we're not taught that nutritional ketosis or even fasting ketosis is a perfectly normal and safe condition. We're not taught that. So that's part of the education that has to come up as well, that this is a normal physiologic process. So, you know, what's the concern with it?
Yeah. So sorry, you were going to say?
Yeah, I was going to say, actually, just brought to my attention just this morning, I was checking comments on our Metabolic Mind YouTube page, and someone said, well, yeah, this might be a good therapy short-term, but you can't stay in ketosis long-term. It's too dangerous. And I was like, please, I'd love to hear more about that. Show me the evidence for that, because there is no evidence. It's just this misconception that's been passed down or portrayed in public, you know, in the public media space, basically. But there's zero evidence to show that. And I'm like, why do people still believe this? And so that's part of what the barriers we have to knock down, both of what you're doing, you know, with the Society for Metabolic Health Practitioners, and what we're doing in Metabolic Mind. A big part of it is knocking down these misconceptions.
Yeah. So I was going to say, what about, so you're talking about evidence, and then you mentioned a bunch of trials that you guys are busy with. Are you able to talk about any of those? I mean, I know often it's until the results start coming out, it's difficult to talk about it a bit. Are you able to say anything about the kinds of trials that you're trying to do?
Yeah, for sure. And like I mentioned, Dr. Sethi and Dr. Campbell both presented their results at the International Society Bipolar Disorder Conference, and are now submitting them for publication. And you know, there are small pilot studies, which is where you have to start. But it showed safety, tolerability, and efficacy for improving psychiatric outcomes and improving, of course, metabolic health outcomes. They measured all of those. So those are great. And then Dr. Jeff Volek is doing one with his team at Ohio State on college age kids, or college age people, I guess they're not kids, college age individuals with depression. And then there's a researcher in Australia who's doing a trial for ketogenic interventions for mental illness. There's someone at UCSF doing one. And, we're not funding all of them, because there's one in Canada, Dr. Bretsky, who's done, I think, maybe like 8 or 9 patients already, and is enrolling more for her study. And, we're starting to see these studies pop up, because it's fascinating as a researcher. I mean, to think that you can be on the forefront of a revolutionary and brand new and very effective psychiatric treatment. Why wouldn't you want to study it and learn more about it? So it's really encouraging to see all these trials sort of pop up, some for bipolar, some for depression, and some for a mix of bipolar, schizophrenia, depression. And the other fascinating thing is, though, I should have mentioned this earlier, the other field where this is really taken off is with anorexia nervosa. And that's, I find, the most fascinating of all, simply because with mental illness, it was just sort of never considered. With anorexia, it was considered an absolute contraindication. You absolutely cannot recommend any type of diet or restrictive way of eating to someone with anorexia. But yet now we've got this momentum showing, hang on a second, since this isn't a diet, since it's a metabolic intervention and a intervention that changes your brain chemistry, it actually is effective. And it all started with Caroline Beckwith, and I did an interview with Caroline and her aunt, Dr. Skolnick. Her aunt really loved her niece, and it killed her to see her struggling with anorexia. So did her own research and just fortunately stumbled upon a ketogenic therapy and started her niece on a ketogenic therapy, and she got remarkably better. She also worked in ketamine infusions. And then from there, they did a 5-person study of ketogenic therapies for anorexia and saw dramatic benefits. Now, Dr. Guido Frank at UCSD is doing a 20-person study on ketogenic therapies for anorexia. So you can see how these things build. Case report, 5-person study, 20-person study, and it's really changing how we see treatments for anorexia. So no longer is, a keto diet contraindicated. Now therapeutic ketosis or ketogenic therapy is potentially a very impactful treatment for people with anorexia. And it shows that, we're too quick to judge and follow rules and guidelines and think they're all evidence-based, when really they're not. To say, a keto diet is contraindicated in anorexia, it has no evidence behind it. It was just somebody saying, oh yeah, that equals a restrictive diet, which equals bad for anorexia, right? But that's not, we got to break that down and question it. And that's where we are now. So, it's fascinating to see this unfold, and just so inspiring to be help be a part of discussing it and education about it.
Yeah. With the keto diet or the keto lifestyle, we even, with our clinical guidelines that we published on the SMHP site, we're doing a revision of it now, and we're already starting to talk about it, but then we're changing that word, because it's therapeutic carbohydrate restriction is what the title of the document is, and we're changing that to carbohydrate reduction. Because that word, you remember Adele Hite with one of them, she even did a talk.
I was just going to say that about
words
Adele.
matter, right?
Yep.
Words are important, and the just that one word changes a lot of things, and that's everything that we teach in trying to teach this lifestyle and this this therapy is that you're reducing the number of carbohydrates that you eat in your diet. You're not reducing calories. It's being replaced by healthy fats. And, if you're somebody that's overeating a lot, who is obese, then we're not even telling you to cut calories. That we feel like normal, in most cases, just by changing the way you diet, and your cravings and all of that change and go away, and so you naturally start eating less, and so your weight starts normalizing. But it can be like that on the other end of the scale with anorexia, where you're not telling them to cut. There's no cutting anything other than carbohydrates, and you're replacing it with something else, and so there's no restriction involved.
Right.
And to get that message across is I didn't even think about it in terms of
because
anorexia.
the reaction is we can't put someone on a weight loss diet. And actually, Ken Berry said it great. He said it's not a weight loss diet; it's a weight optimization diet. I was like, that's a great way to say it, because
then too much comes down, too little comes up, right? And we meet in
right,
the middle.
You're providing nutrition, and it's a ketogenic therapy that changes the chemistry of your brain. Because anorexia isn't just a disease of low weight. It's a psychiatric condition with a change of your thoughts and a perseveration about an obsession about food and restricting food. So it's the weight, but it's also what's going on in your brain. So by changing your brain chemistry
and all these things
with depression and anxiety as almost 100% comorbidities. I guess you can never say 100%, but like very frequent comorbidities to go along with it. So if you can change your brain fuel and have a ketogenic therapy to improve brain health and mental health, then that's going to improve that one part of anorexia, which then therapy comes with, nutritious and healthy foods, then all the better, right? And so that's where ketogenic therapies can really have an impact.
Yeah, no, this is fascinating, Bret. I'm super keen to get, now that we've had this, even more so, to seriously consider doing this, like featuring mental health and getting you and Jan and your whole organization involved in doing something next year. Is that something that would work for you?
Absolutely, we would be interested. Let's we'll talk more offline.
Okay, yeah, no, let's do that. Let's make that happen. I think that's a really good that's a really good subject for a focus at next year's event in San Diego in August.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I'm not sure the time frame analogy, but you could say it was like, I don't know, 6 years ago with type 2 diabetes, or maybe a little bit more, right? That it was like just starting to become thought of and discussed more as a treatment for type 2 diabetes. Now, in part thanks to Virta Health and many others, lots of people are saying it should be standard of care for type 2 diabetes, and it's definitely caught on so much more. And that's where we are now with psychiatry, that this is just starting to get the momentum. And that's why we need, more conferences to talk about it, more ways to educate people. We've got a YouTube page to really help people learn, but that's one thing. If we can disseminate it all over and get more physicians talking about it, get more dietitians talking about it, get more health coaches talking about it, that's how we start to build this movement to really just help more people, right? That's the ultimate goal. We want more people being treated in this fashion to help them get their lives back.
Yeah, no, this is inspiring me. I'm already looking forward to next year's San Diego. We haven't even got to this year's one yet. Please, let's talk some more and make this happen. I think it's going to be awesome.
All right, let's do it.
Okay, thanks very much for your time, Bret. It was awesome.
My pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity.
Okay. You've been listening to an episode of the Low Carb USA podcast. You can support us on Patreon at patreon.com/lowcarbusa.